Greetings, everybody. Yeah, looks like there's no weird countdown thing. Turning down music. Yes, so I'm here and I'm streaming and stuff. I'm sure you can hear the typing. My microphone is too sensitive and I don't have a good way to fix that. But, yeah, so thanks for coming out, everyone. This is my second whole DemonaCast stream. Boy, if I can't talk already after, like, one sentence, we know we're going to be in good shape here. But yeah, I'm not going to draw so much today, although I do think I'm going to do that kind of stream again because it's kind of chill. But, ta-da! Yeah, so I've got a bunch of notes and stuff like that. We're going to do, as advertised, I want to do sort of a lore stream. I want to talk about a region, a specific region of the Feysky. The Feysky is theoretically infinite. It's certainly very, very, very big. And you could do a whole pile of entire sort of mini settings there. No, this is not World Anvil. This is it's a tool called Notion. It's just your own kind of like linked document full of stuff. But yeah, so before I get to the region of the Feysky that I want to talk about, we got to do some general catch everyone up on the Feysky. I'm going to start real simple. I'm sure everyone here has watched Tales from My D&D campaign. Otherwise, I don't know why you're here. But that's the world that we're talking about. It's the world of Tales from My D&D campaign, TDDC. And boy, we're getting some questions already. I don't know, maybe the rest of you can keep track of some of those questions in case we can get back to them later. But before we do too many like questions and stuff like that, I want to get everyone caught up. So the world of TDDC is there's only, boy, I'm bad at this. So the planescape of Tales from My D&D campaign is very limited. There are really only like 3 planes that mortals can generally go to. There's the normal world, which we call the Fadelands, or at least everyone not from there calls it the Fadelands. Then there's the Shadowfell, sort of the darker plane, and the Feywild. And those worlds kind of overlap. Like when you cast a dimensional portal to go from one world to another, you don't move in space. You just move your plane. So you end up in the same exact place in the Shadowfell, or the same exact place in the Feywild. And their geography, it tends to be very similar at the surface level anyway. Now, we know that the Underdark exists only in the Shadowfell. There are some tunnels and stuff which may go down pretty deep, we don't know, in the normal world. In the Shadowfell, it goes down. It's either infinite or to the center of the planet. It's a little bit unclear there. There are a bunch of different layers as you go down. But in the Shadowfell, there is basically no sky. You can't go up into the sky. There is a solid barrier around 17 feet up, right, where it takes sort of more and more energy. Around the 17 or 17 and a half foot mark, it starts taking more and more energy until very rapidly it takes kind of infinite energy to go up. So you just can't go up into the sky there, which is especially disconcerting because you can sometimes see the faint shapes of mountains in the distance, and you can see, like, there is still a moon and a sun, a very pale sun, that you can kind of see through that misty ceiling, which makes even less sense. But that's it. We also know that in the Feywild, because a party went to the Feywild at one point, we found out that you can't go down more than 8 feet. If you dig a hole, you run into that same sort of barrier where it would take infinitely more energy to go down further than about 8 feet below the surface in the Feywild. But the sky, unlike the Shadowfell, goes up forever. And in fact, it goes up much farther than it seems to go up in the normal world. So, starting from that point, which I think everyone already knew, but I just wanted to get that out of the way there, we have not gone into what goes on in the Feysky basically at all in TDDC or any of the lore videos and stuff like that. So that's where we're going to start out here. And we're going to start going through, just to get you caught up quickly, to get to where I want to get you, we got to describe what the layers are of the Feysky, okay? So we know the Feywild is more, it feels a lot more magical. There are a lot more spirits there. It's way more colorful. There's lots of energy. We know that there's actually there's energy just in the sky, just being there already. Because, for example, we found some trees that were like 400 feet high. They were still very narrow, and they had these huge floppy leaves that shouldn't have been strong enough to hold themselves up. But they did, because they take some of their energy from the sun, some of their energy just the ambient energy of the plane. So we know that there's energy up in the sky. But anyhow, I've got a bunch of layers here you can see, and they've got their different names, including the Gnomish names with their draconic roots, and then there are a couple other names. So the Geozephirium, the colloquially called the dirt winds or earth sky or whatever, it's the sky that we're used to. It goes up maybe about 10 kilometers, right? And you can go pretty close to that high in the normal world. So that's where all kinds of like normal weather happens and that, and things operate there pretty much the way they do down in the Fade lands and stuff like that. There's different wildlife. There's more. We've seen there's some crazy stuff. There are rocks like ROC, the giant birds that can actually swoop down and eat elephants. We know they're up there. We also know the Feywild had some weird birds that just, instead of a head, they just have a flame, and they go in packs, and apparently you don't want to mess with them. But we don't know too much else of what goes on up there, right? And I've got some other notes about here. There's stuff like gunpowder and other stuff like that. I don't know what I just did to my notes there. Gunpowder and some other things don't work down at these low altitudes. On the other hand, normal flight magic works in this zone. And they do, like the note says here, there is people living down near the Earth. They're still affected by the massive vertical weather systems that happen higher up in the phase sky. And they have like ultra-massive storms, bizarre tornado and hurricane systems, lightning on a scale unimaginable to inhabitants of the other planes. Okay, but that's not much. All we learned there basically is that the gnomes have a name for this. Now, when you get up above that roughly 10-kilometer ceiling, you run into this wall where a lot of normal flight magic stops working properly. You can cast the fly spell, right? You cast a fly spell and you move. I should adjust this so my eyes are closer. If I look at my camera, it's closer to where you are. It would be helpful. So if you cast the standard third level spell fly, you can fly up 10 kilometers, but you reach a point there where your flight spell just starts to crap out, like it just won't gain altitude anymore. And you can't use the same means that you normally would to get higher up. And that's where we start to get into the Epizephirium, the low winds, sort of the inner sky. This is still like another wider shell around the world, but it's still, my distances are fuzzy, right? We know this starts at 10 kilometers and it goes up pretty far, probably in the hundreds of miles or kilometers or whatever, but it's a little bit uncertain. But we start running into these keywords, the keyword Zephiric being an important one. If you want to have a flight spell that works in this zone, it needs to have the Zephiric modifier, right? So you could have a spell like that. If your regular fly spell would actually just function as Featherfall when you're up in this area, and 6th level or higher flight spells would just function as Levitation. So you can get around a little bit, but it's tricky. Is it a lower magic problem, a gravity problem, or something more abstract? No, it's just that flight works differently here. Or maybe it's that the fly spells that are normally used are efficient down at those low altitudes, but they're not the same. They never had to design a fly spell that worked higher than 10 kilometers, and it may just be that they didn't think of the problem in that. Because it is a problem that can be worked around, but certainly, yes, you need different, specifically tuned flight spells to work at Zephiric altitudes like this. You could get around it by casting a spell that grows physical wings, or you could just be born with wings. And wings will still work. There's nothing stopping your wings from working. There's still air. But because the distances start to get so big, most winged creatures are just not going to be efficient for getting around. Like, even rocks don't tend to go all that high. They don't tend to go up above here because things to eat are just fewer and farther between. But yeah, so you get up into this area. There is a lot of crazy weather going on in this area. There's also, you can run into, among the various weird weather phenomena, there are solid clouds. You can run into some actual Jack and the Beanstalk sort of shit, because there are actually, there are plants that will grow in some of these forms, some types of clouds, where between the magical energy of the atmosphere or whatever is going on up there, the right kind of cloud and the right kind of plant, they can get together, and you can end up with the plants sort of forming a more solid surface, holding the cloud together and just staying up. So there can actually be places to land up there and interesting things. There's a lot of dangerous weather and stuff like that. But where things really start to get more interesting is, let's close those, is when you get up into the Latizipherium. So the free winds, or the true sky, as a lot of natives call it, or the wide sky. Lots of names for things because there are lots of people to name them. So up here, your terrestrial flight magic just literally does nothing. So in the Epizepherium, you could cast Fly to function as a feather fall in an emergency. You fall out of a ship or something, you're like, oh shit, fly, and you're still generating magical lift, or whatever you want to call it. Your spell is still doing enough to stop you from dying as you go down. So that's great. Up here, your fly spell would just not work. You would keep falling until, assuming that you were still alive and your fly spell was still operational, you would hit the next stratum down, and then your fly spell would kick in as Featherfall, and you could slow yourself down a little bit. So that's lots of fun. But there's some other stuff. There are a lot of, up here you start to run into actual solid islands, or skylands as a lot of people call them in other settings and stuff like that. So we're just going to go with skylands. I don't think it's proprietary to anyone. I think it's actually used all over the place. And usually they're in the form of sort of floating reefs. It seems like most of the floating islands that you run into up here are things that are either currently alive or were once alive. You get things as like, think of like coral reef. That's kind of the form that this stuff takes. So you can have some that seem to be basically dead, but while they were alive, they gathered a whole bunch of the planar energy just throughout their lifespan and sort of encapsulated it. And then even after they died, they just hang there in the air. They're floating because of this magical, like, zephyric energy that they've gathered, which is pretty cool. But you can also have ones that are actually alive. You can have ones that are more sort of fungal in nature, like mycelial networks, where they're all like wound together, but still they've sort of gathered this energy that helps to keep them aloft. And these can get fairly large. You can also run into some. Speaking of this, I love the idea. One of the things that I thought was really cool was I watched some videos of coral reefs attacking each other. I think they're sped up. I think you have to watch it like time lapse. But if you ever, after the stream, just Google like coral reefs attacking each other, or there's some stuff like that. It's really freaky because they start shooting out strands at each other. Like they're fighting for space in their reef. They start as they get too close to one another, they start to react by like shooting out strands at each other, and they're basically they're shooting out their stomach material and trying to dissolve each other. So I really like the idea that you get these big islands, and some of the ones that are alive can be like that, where they when they run into each other, and they can run into two islands that are actually just kind of like attacking each other in a very creepy and alive sort of way. So, as said, Manal asked, does the Zephyric energy leak out over time? So it sounds like a recipe for naturally occurring orbital bombardment. No, as far as they can tell, as far as the inhabitants can tell, and we're going to get to some inhabitants later, these reefs, or at least the vast majority of them, seem to be stable. Even the ones that have been dead for, as far as they can tell, hundreds or 1,000 years or something, they seem to just keep floating, which is, as you may have noted, very good for the people way down at the ground level who would prefer not to be hit by orbital islands collapsing on them. So that's kind of like the environment. So there's a lot of, you have to remember, there's a ton of space up here. This place feels much more like an ocean. It's a three-dimensional ocean, but you can go very long distances without running into things. You can, and there's some things stay close together, some things are moving at different speeds, some things are orbiting the planet. We'll get to that stuff later. But yeah, you can have archipelagos where they interact with each other on a regular basis, and that's kind of neat. And then you can also have them float into range of another archipelago that used to not be in that reach, and now you have a new situation. You might encounter new people, you might have conflicts with them or trade with them or stuff like that. But again, usually there are pretty large distances between a lot of these things. Then again, some of them do weird things. Some of them, even the solid clouds below, but also these reefs, sometimes they join together by plants and stuff like that. You can actually have like two of the solid clouds where they join together by long vertical strands of vegetation, just kind of like hold them together and make their own kind of little archipelago there. But if you've been reading ahead on the notes that I've got open here, just like dark vision, you don't need dark vision to survive in the Underdark. There's nothing about having dark vision. Well, there's nothing about living that requires dark vision, except that it really, really helps you to not get killed by the things that exist down in the Underdark. It also helps you to find food, etc. So, just like dark vision's not required, there's a property called Wind Sight that starts to come into effect as you get this high in the phase sky. Wind Sight, you don't need Wind Sight to live. Not even remotely. You could argue it's less important than dark vision in the Shadowfell. You really want to have dark vision in the Underdark. But what Wind Sight does a bunch of things. So it's a form of specialized vision which has very little effect at or below geozephyric attitudes or in the other planes. There's no good reason to have in the Fadelands to cast a spell that gives you Wind Sight. Such a spell might exist, but normally there'd be no use for it. But when you get up here into latticepheric altitudes and higher, Wind Sight can do some things for you. And Wind Sight normally comes with a range. Like, you got dark vision 60 feet or 30 feet. You usually have Wind Sight like 10 kilometers or Wind Sight 50 kilometers or something like that, in case it matters. So Wind Sight lets a creature see the complex flows and directions of winds. Some gnomes tend to use magic items or spells to access Wind Sight because they don't naturally have it, but they find it useful up here. Some of them describe it as looking like a series of moving, shifting, translucent pipes. So you look out ahead of you and you see the shape of the wind. It's just a thing that's there that we can't see with our ordinary vision, but is there. And because the winds can become extremely tricky and complex and maybe a little bit more magical up here, it's very useful to have that if you're flying or navigating any kind of vehicle or flying creature up at these altitudes. So it gives you a bonus to those sorts of checks. It also lets you substitute your intelligence or wisdom for dexterity when making those flight or navigation checks, or when making reflex saves against any hazards or attacks that have the Zephyric trait. Because you're going to find there are creatures that have the Zephyric trait. If you ran into an air elemental up here, an air elemental, most air elementals that you run into down at the ground level, they're already doing their air elemental stuff. They're fine. But if you run into the same air elemental up here, you're going to find that it counts as a Zephyric creature, and it's going to get potentially some gross bonuses against you if you don't have Wind Sight to help you dodge or avoid those things. And yeah. So, that's what it mentions down there. Wind-touched creatures normally get +4 to hit and to save DCs against non-wind-touched creatures, and they get +4 damage on attack rolls when moving faster than their target, which, if they're Zephyric and you're not, they're almost always going to be moving faster. Most wind-touched creatures are weakened or simply can't survive below this strata. So if you go down to the Epizephyric altitude, they'd be trying to get back up. And if they're down at the Earth level, they're probably dying. In most cases. That's not a universal rule. That's really a usually sort of rule. That is, you would expect sort of rule. Definitely not always the rule. So that's an interesting thing. It means if you had some kind of vessel that traveled up into the sky here, up into the Fey sky, you would want to get yourself some kind of wind sight, at the very least for the person who's steering, because it could help you avoid some serious and otherwise basically invisible trouble. There's also, wind sight has been described as possibly having some kind of interaction with time. That is definitely not certain. That's argued, but there are some people who argue that it has something to do with time, because when you're seeing those wind currents, it's not about seeing where is the wind now. The wind isn't anywhere now. Wind is movement of particles. So when you see those translucent tubes that show you like where the currents are going and how they're shifting, some like arcane specialists would argue that it's actually a time-related effect, that you're seeing into the future, like Jedi stuff, because why not? Is that really the case? Doesn't matter. This is how it works, basically. So that's the basic info on the Lattice Ethereum. We've got two other layers up here. I'm just going to go over quickly. Oh, there was some questions I might have wanted to do. What about air pressure? Stays unchanged. There's a factor up here. Air pressure up to this point, up to the like Latticepheric altitudes, doesn't seem to change particularly. You don't have any problems surviving there. But when you get into the circumzephiric altitudes, it's called the choking winds for a reason, or some people call it the hollow sky. Up here, not only is your terrestrial flight magic useless, but the air is thin up here, and it makes it hard for most creatures to breathe, even when standing still. So here you're starting to run into problems where, is it really air pressure, or is it a fantasy setting and it's just not working quite the same way? But what about the Cloud Whale from the Saga of Balvan? That was probably... I don't actually remember now. That would have been from layer 2 or 3 up here. If you pay attention to the Saga of Balvan, there's a strong correlation. You can tell that this was involved when those two spirits were flying upwards. In fact, you can learn a lot. You can learn not a lot. You can learn a little bit about the layers of the Underdark also if you pay attention to when Balvan was going down various times. But that's another story. But yeah, so up in the circumzephiric altitudes, you get some much larger... Like, there are some pretty big floating reefs, skylands sort of things in the Lattice Ethereum, but they don't tend to be continent size. That's really uncommon there. They tend to still be more what you would call islands. When you get up to the circumzephiric altitudes, things may be very far apart, but you're much more likely to find like a continent-sized island or full huge-ass mountains that are just floating up here. It's a little bit less clear. The nice thing about those Latticepheric reefs is that you can kind of make biological sense of how those things came to be. It's much harder to explain why there's so much floating real estate up here in the Choking Winds. People don't know as much about it. But there's what you're going to run into here that I'm sure is interesting to a lot of people is there is actually gunpowder in the setting. The gunpowder that they have doesn't work down at those sort of ground level altitudes. You've got to be at, like, where does it start working? Is it epispheric? Yeah, I think you have to be in at least 10 kilometers up is the area where their gunpowder, at least the way that they make it here, starts to work. Gunpowder is made of a substance called sky marrow, or it's commonly called spark dust, which is not very scientific, but yeah. So, remember I was saying there was no gunpowder in the Extras video, where there isn't any gunpowder anywhere that the party has ever been. But this is not somewhere they've been. So, the thing is, although the gunpowder works down in layer 1, layer 2, it's hard to find the stuff that you need to make the gunpowder. It's hard to find the sky marrow stuff in those levels. It's much more common up in the circumzephyric altitudes and the Choking Winds, which is inconvenient because it's a lot harder to navigate and to survive up here. You need some kinds of, like, you don't strictly need to have some kind of protection for your average humanoid to be up here. I mean, you still can breathe, but it's really ineffective. Like, you're gonna get fatigued and exhausted pretty quick. So, yeah. So, yeah, there's supposed to be patron chat as well, and I'm going to try and get that in, like, later streams, because I have a room set up for it on the Discord, and if you're a patron, you can actually go and chat there right now. But at the moment, everyone's coming here, and I got to kind of get people used to that, so we can gotta get people used to the streams in the first place, and then we'll see if we can get things down to where we have more, like, the patrons down there, and I can sort of prioritize Patreon questions. We can try that now, but we'll see how that goes. Sorry, got interrupted. Back to the... Yeah, so you don't strictly need to have self-contained breathing to be up in the choking sky, but it's pretty inconvenient. Like, you're gonna get fatigued or exhausted pretty quickly if you're doing any kind of exertion up here. You can actually end up short of breath without doing any exertion. It's not great. But it's not unsurvivable. You might fall unconscious if you work yourself too hard. You're probably not going to die unless you actually had a breathing condition of some kind previously. But it makes it very hard for them to go up here to mine sky marrow and spark dust. It makes any source of that stuff that you can get at from the true sky, from the wide sky, like the layer below this, that makes that stuff really valuable. But you certainly can get it from up here. And then there's, of course... Oh, that's the other thing. You start to get a new keyword. Remember, we had the Zephyric keyword for spells. There is another layer of flight spells, because when you get up into the Circumzephirium here, now your Zephyric flight spells, the special flight spells that you got to work at these higher levels, they start to weaken up here, where now you need, just like fly in the Epizephirium, if you try and use your Zephyric fly spell up here, it's going to turn into Featherfall. Or if you have like a level 6 or higher one, it's going to get reduced to Levitation. If this is well discussed, but why is it the Shadowfell has a sky limit and the Feywild has a floor limit? Ha 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 ha. No, that it is definitely an original concept of mine. I don't know exactly where I came up with that, but I know that I liked the idea that you have the Underdark in the Shadowfell, so it can go down forever, and then you would have a counterpart that goes up forever, but that those two planes would not have the reverse, that you wouldn't... I'm not going to design a big sky in the Shadowfell. It makes it more unique if the Shadowfell just goes down, and the Feywild just goes up. So that was a question by Bulk Squat Thrust, which I was initially like, that's lore stuff I'm not going to tell you. But you were asking about developing it, and part of what I wanted to do this stream to talk more about like logic and stuff like that. And next question, Kakaris is trying to transition me into, are there any active nation civilizations? I'm going to go into, that's what I want to work on today. I don't know if I'm going to work on it that much relative to telling you about it, but we can think about stuff. But I've got a region that's like a whole civilization, a couple of interlocking nations that I want to deal with. That's mainly what I'm going to cover in the stream. But yeah, the last bits here though, so you need flight stuff with the void tag to work up in the choking winds here and in that last layer that goes up there. So you literally, it's just like before, like the void spells, actually void flight stuff won't work at all down at the low levels. If you're down at the Geozephirium near the planet, your void flight spells don't do anything. Where you need them to operate up here. And like I said, more sporting. This is where you got sporting. I've mostly covered that. So then the other thing, of course, the real reason we call them void spells is because the last layer, the dead sky, is the void, the Archaeozephirium, as the gnomes call it. Because the gnomes have to have a longer, more scientific sounding name for everything. That's how gnomes roll, right? Everyone knows. So here, your both terrestrial and zephyric flight magic does nothing. You have to have void flight magic to give you maneuverability up in the dead sky. Finally, you are beyond the wind's reach. Creatures which breathe cannot survive here without a sealed environment. But it is not the end of all things. The night is absolute blackness, but even the day is endless black, where only the sun side of objects is illuminated. The distances between objects can be incomprehensible. One might travel tens or hundreds of thousands of miles without encountering anything, even the smallest thing. So, clearly there is something up here. It's not nothing. But if you go up here, you're probably going to find nothing unless you have some way to actually find stuff. So we're not going to cover that very much. I do want to make clear, again, to me, the setting of TDDC is not an infinite worlds setting. So you aren't going to go up into space here, because this is obviously space. Everyone knows I'm talking about space. It's similar to space, but you can't go to another solar system and then find another planet where people can live on. It's not like that. There may be things out there. There are almost certainly things up there that don't breathe. They may have civilizations and stuff like that, but really, this is, even though it's a place you can theoretically go, it's probably not a place anyone's going to go. And I'm not going to be developing anything much more up there right now. But what you've probably noticed is my note here about the GIF. So we're going to get into, this is where I really want to focus on this area, because it's almost like a mini setting that I've been working on up here that exists on the boundary, near the boundary. It's in the Latizephirium. So okay, I gotta stop using every name for everything. We're gonna call it the wide sky, okay? It's in the wide sky, but it's very near the top of the wide sky. They live near the transition area between the wide sky and the hollow sky, or the choking winds. Now obviously they have a normal air-breathing civilization, so they do spend almost all of their time, most of the people there spend 100% of their time in the wide sky where you can breathe. But they live on the border with the choking winds because they do want to be able to get up there and mine sky marrow. That's the good stuff. And part of why they want that stuff is because, of course, the dominant species, the dominant civilization here is based mainly around the GIF. And I don't know if you guys are how much everyone's up on D&D, but the GIF are these guys. This is not my picture. This is from like an official book, I'm pretty sure. The GIF are your space hippos. Now, again, here they're not space hippos. They don't go into space. They exist in the Skyjammer setting. Or I'm losing my words now because I don't pay any attention to their setting. What's the name? Starjammer. That's what I'm going for. Starjammer is the normal D&D setting where people travel between the crystal spheres, where they actually like have basically magic space. Yeah, Spelljammer. That's it, not Starjammer. Sorry. Yeah, in D&D, a D&D setting that has spaceships. You have Githyanki and Mind Flayers, and that have magical spaceships, and they fly between crystal spheres and whatever crap they do. I'm not doing that so much, but I do like the military uniformed Gunpowder Hippos. Okay, they're pretty awesome. Part of the inspiration for this area is there was like a tweet way back when there was a thing going around on Twitter that was just like, you're only allowed 5 species for your D&D setting. Which are your 5? And I kind of liked that idea, so I took my like 5 species, or I took most of my 5 species, and I just gave them a setting up here. I really don't know that much about Spelljammer, so your questions can be for each other if you're asking about Spelljammer, but I don't know that much about it. I have only the surface knowledge on that stuff. I'm working on my own stuff. But anyway, so what we have up here, if I start opening up the rest of the document. So yeah, we have our anthropomorphic hippos. They're called the GIF normally. Now, I wanted to mess around with it. The problem is that GIF sounds almost identical to Gith, which is short for the Githzerai and the Githyanki, who are 2 related species that are normally also in Spelljammer and Planescape and stuff like that. And GIF and Gith are way too confusable for people who know D&D. So one of the things I did is I said, okay, we're going to have several ethnicities that are sort of all GIF in a sense, but as a group we're going to call them the Margif, because that just sort of helps to. No, Gith are different. Gith look more like space. Gith are more like space elves, right? The GIF are the hippos. I'm not the one who invented that like mess of a name. It is kind of the same mess as I originally had with the Kuatoa, where I had the Illuvians and the Deluvians were their original names. That's why one of them got changed to Illud, so it sounds different. So we normally refer to the group of all GIF, all the hippo people, as Margif in this setting. And one of the things that lets me do is also, they're not all hippos. We have 3 main ethnicities. They're the Kubu, who they have their own style. They like double-breasted coats, and they wear red sashes normally. They're the Sioqui GIF, who are also hippos. They have single-breasted coats. They usually wear blue or green sashes. This is just like cultural, ethnic stuff. Then there are the Renoster GIF, who are clearly like cousins of them, but they're like these guys, but rhinos, basically. They have yellow sashes. And then there's also the Rafa GIF, which sort of encompasses various other minor ethnicities who are still hippo or rhino people, but they just have their own sort of cultures and stuff like that, much smaller. So this is where I start building, because you don't want your society to be a monolithic thing. You don't want to say this race is like this. And it's hard because for a fantasy world and to bring in people that don't know it, you do want to be able to say this race is like this. But you want to make them feel like real people. So they have split up along the way into different cultures. They're related in some ways. And yes, Marco G, this is like a floating island setting, way up near the border between the part of the sky you can breathe and the part where you can't. That's a good question. See, I don't necessarily think about everything having sex with everything else, Tom, so that wasn't in my mind, but I'm gonna just go offhand and say no. I don't think the rhinos can breed with the hippos. I think they got to be separate. But still, like, all the hippos can interbreed because they're actually the same species. All the rhinos can interbreed because they're actually the same species, even though some of them have different ethnicities. That's why they're ethnicities and not species. But so that's the basic there. We've got a bunch of other regional species because it's got to make it more interesting. Have they had a Lilliput style war over which type of coat was better? No, but because just like the humans, they have like just like humans, we'll come up with stupid distinctions, and we don't fight with other humans because they dress different as a rule. But we dress different to show that we are different from this other group sometimes. And for whatever combination of differences, we end up fighting. No, don't worry about dumb questions. I'm telling you a bunch of stuff just from out of nowhere. Which I'm just spewing out at you guys. But, so, if you have questions that are unusual, that's not unexpected at all, and there's nothing wrong with that. Oh, that's one of the things, though. Now that you guys have an idea of what we're doing, so we've got an island air... We've got a section which is kind of its own mini setting. It is full of skylands. They're floating. They do battle with ships, as we're going to see, and stuff like that. They have gunpowder. They have different like battles between military uniformed hippo guys. So one of the things I'd like you guys to just think about or brainstorm in the chat is, I don't have a name for this area. Like, what would be the setting name for this area? I mean, I don't necessarily start on it right now because we're going to learn more about it as we do, but that's something to think about as we talk about this stuff. So in addition to our Margif, the various groups that we call Margif, the other regional species we have are Tabaxi, so cat people. And I've broken them down into a couple different kinds. I'm sure D&D has several names for like what lion people are supposed to be. There's like leonins or something, or they're supposed to be separate. I'm treating them all as just another kind of Tabaxi, really. I'm not like gonna say, oh, they have like all majorly different racial attributes and stuff. The different types of cat people might have different cultural identities, but that's different. So we have the Leon, which is what I'm calling the lion people. They actually, the male Leon, wear bandanas to cover and flatten their mane on top, because they don't like to show that in public. That's private for for their lady Leons. But then you have the Chesh, who are kind of like a little bit Cheshire cat-like. They're kind of stereotyped for their alternatingly silly and or sinister grin. If there's a stereotype about them, it's the grin. They're the Bura, who are black cat people. They're stereotyped as bad luck and sneaky because they're black cats and stuff. That's just what do you expect? I don't know. Everyone sucks. One of the things is when you start getting into how different groups interact. Just like in the real world, everyone does kind of suck, so that's it. Then we also have the Tian, which are the short-haired cats, and most other kinds of house cats are represented, but just like the Rafa above, I've just got like, and other ethnicities. So these ones here are the more common kinds that you're going to run into of Tabaxi. You also sometimes run into gnomes up here. Gnomes are pretty uncommon, but they seem to get around in the setting. There. Zephyrium is the setting name. Not a bad idea. Any relation between the Tabaxi and the Rakshasa? Not at all. Actually, absolutely no. Yeah, they're not even in the same phylum. Like the Rakshasa are actually, if anything, they're closer to demons than to mortals. So the Tabaxi, on the other hand, are cats. The fact that the Rajas, the Rakshasas that we've run into, happen to look cat-like, not necessarily any relation to actual cat people in the setting. But up here we also have the Aarakocra, seems like a good place for them because they're bird people. They can fly. Similar to the cats, I've got them broken up. You can have all different kinds of Aarakocra. They're like cranes, owls, pelicans, sparrows, eagles. Basically every kind of bird except for crows and ravens. Because the crows and ravens at some point were cursed by Larathal. They became the Kenku, basically. They lost their ability to fly. And they seem to have all, like, disappeared, and they live down on the at ground level or in the Shadowfell, frankly. So, that's it. So, that's what's going on with the bird people. Bird people obviously seem like a good choice in a setting like this. They can fly. Flying is good. Also, many Aarakocra have wind sight naturally, which these other species don't. Which is going to turn out to be pretty useful later on. And the other species I've got is the Griff Lee, because this is, again, when I'm making it, because the genesis of this idea still came from that pick 5 species thing. So I have got the Griff Lee. If you don't know Griff Lee, I should have dragged up. There's a really cute picture of them from the 2nd ed monster manual. They're frog people, but there are different frog people in D&D. They're not humanoid frogs. They're frog-shaped frogs. They're small creatures, so they're actually like 3 feet long or something like that. They're frog-shaped frogs who just have prehensile hands. So you get like a frog that's got like a belt and like a knife or something like that. Sorry, Tom, we talked a lot about wind sight. You're going to have to either sort of catch on as we go along, or you have to watch like earlier in the stream, because I'd already talked about that for 10 minutes or something. When wind sight lets you see the wind. Yeah, but it's better than that. But anyway, so the Griff Lee, you can have tons of different colors of Griff Lee. The Griff Lee actually come in so many different color patterns that people aren't, even up here, where they seem to like classifying people. They don't tend to classify the Griff Lee by their colors, because basically every island where the Griff Lee live, they seem to end up with a different color pattern. So that's kind of interesting. So those are all the people that we've got going on. What do we have for nations up here? So we've got three main nations, and this is where we start to get all sort of the conflict in this area. So the Margif, Metra de Desilucios. Rakshasa are not related to other cat folk. We mentioned that just like a couple minutes ago. But thanks for coming. So we have these 3 groups here. The Marmar Thalassocracy. They're also just called Gouvernul Marmar. Or the Gouvernul, or the government by a lot of people. The Siaqui Confederacy, that's, you can obviously, the Marmar Thalassocracy is mainly dominated by the Kubu Gif. They're kind of like in charge there. The Siaqui Confederacy, it's mainly the Siaqui Gif who are on top. And then there's also the Free Skies League, where it's much more, the Free Skies League is a much more egalitarian sort of society. There's the really short version is the Marmar, these guys are like the government. They have much heavier ships for their navy. The Siaqui they're kind of like a colonial power that has decolonized. So they are making efforts to be more egalitarian, but the Hippo people still have more of the wealth, more of the power, and they just, even if there's equality under the law, they have all the advantages, so they are still pretty clearly on top. And then the Free Skies League is just kind of like everyone. Everyone is, this is the only one, that's, if you want to identify it, this is the only one where you just about ever see a hippo working for a non-hippo, or a rhino working for a non-rhino or hippo type person. So that's the really short version of them. Sorry, I gotta blow my nose. Genetically runny nose. That's what I've got. I want to go into these specifically. I should come back to the nations a little bit more. I just gave you the short version. That's good. So like I said, this sort of civilization lives near the the boundary between the hollow, between the wide sky and the hollow sky, which is a good place because again, you want access to the sky marrow, the spark dust, like the stuff you need to make gunpowder that is in the higher up area, but you obviously want to live in the area where you can breathe properly. So the reefs in this area can get pretty big, but they're still not like continent size. They're not huge floating mountains. Some of them are connected via vegetation, similar to what I was talking about with the clouds. So you find they have a lot of ships. They have a lot of like naval combat and stuff like that. If you want to, if you want to have your own ship, I mean, you have your own ship, but you're probably not part of one of the other. You're probably not part of one of the first two organizations. If you lived up here natively and you have your own ship, yes, you're probably in the Free Skies League. They're much more like freewheeling and free in general. That's why it's in the name. But there are a lot of ships going on. There's a lot of trade, there's a lot of warfare and stuff like that. There are Sky Marrow mines, or there are places where you find Sky Marrow that people fight over. That's exactly what we're trying to set up here. There's still a lot of like strange wildlife up here, and there are large empty spaces, and usually you don't see a lot of things flying around in wide empty spaces. But like in the ocean, again, the ocean analogy is really good. It's 3-dimensional, and just like in the ocean, where there are islands, suddenly there tends to be all kinds of life. And even where there are ships, you tend to find there are weird creatures that circle around underneath the ships to pick off people who fall down, or like garbage that gets thrown off and stuff like that. Do the nations up there ever artificially connect the islands? If they can, like, it's really beneficial if you can. It's difficult a lot of the time. As I've been always like, wait, there's a nation with free in the name that isn't a repressive totalitarian dictatorship? That's the least realistic thing in the whole setting. Possibly. Okay, there are things they call sky sharks. They aren't necessarily actually sharks. But anyway, where was I getting at? So one of the really important issues up here is orbitals, or alacrites. God, I don't even know where I got that word from. That's a word somewhere that made sense. So although the wide sky has countless wind currents and jet streams which shift and change, apparently a shift with an O, delete, type. There are countless wind currents and jet streams all over the place. The winds are really complex when you're moving around there. But the greatest of those currents are the orbitals. So there are great wind streams that circle all the way around the planet. The planet is far down below. We're talking hundreds of miles down. But there are these huge, like, powerful jet streams that are going around. They may not be super fast, but they're kind of steady enough so that you get skylands that can move through them. So yeah, while most of the skylands are vaguely geosynchronous, so most of the lands that they have up here that these three nations deal with, there are a whole big network, whole big archipelago of these skylands that are relatively stable in relation to one another. You know that this one is 200 miles west of this other one, and they're always that distance apart in that direction, or they're drifting very slowly. Like, some of them actually, they have sort of a wobble. Like, they may drift a couple miles to the north during part of the year and then move back a couple miles to the south in another season, stuff like that. But generally, these territories are kind of fixed. But then you have these orbitals, these huge currents that go all the way around the planet, even though we're hundreds of miles out from the planet. And skylands that get caught up in these orbitals might pass by the Margif territories quickly, like they might pass by this whole region in a matter of days, or on a slower orbital, they might drift in and out of trading range over a period of years. So you have there's this constant where these nations have their own places, and they trade with each other or fight with each other or both, and that's fixed. But there's always this gradual influx of new islands that are coming into range of them, that they can go and harvest for resources, and also some of those things passing out of range. So you might be trying to get stuff out of this island before it gets too far apart. Yeah, greetings, Joe and Sentient Constructs. You missed a whole bunch. You're going to have to go back later. We're way up in the sky, way in the Feysky, and we're dealing with this little setting area of hippo people, cat people, frog people, and fun stuff. And Aarakocra, bird people. So yeah, so the orbitals make it really interesting because it means that as a setting, you can have all these fixed areas, and then you can just add kind of whatever you want that just kind of happens to float into range. And if you can have like a fast moving one, like, oh crap, there's this island full of sky marrow, the stuff they use to make gunpowder, which just came into range, but it's moving so fast that it's going to move out of range. It's going to be like 1,000 miles away from this territory within a week. So not only are people aren't so much fighting to get there, they're like racing to get there. Now, Ration's asking, how does navigation work? You mentioned you can't go to other solar systems. How high are the stars? The stars move about the same as they move to us on Earth. Like the constellations seem to move like that. It's one of those funny things where no matter how high you go into Feysky, the stars do still seem kind of infinitely distant, even though we've seen some really odd interactions. And of course, they seem like the same distance in the Shadowfell, in those rare conditions where you can see any stars at all, even though the Shadowfell only has like a 17-foot sky. But yeah, so that's what the area like. What is life like up here? So the gunpowder is important, because the various Margif nations are constantly struggling to maintain their supply lines to secure the sky marrow, the spark dust, from the stratum above. But they're also looking for metal, cleaner water, and concentrate. And that's what we have to get into. Okay, so one of the things is, everything is a little bit more magical up here. I mean, that's why gunpowder works up here and not down at ground level. But cantrips are already like unlimited castings in my setting, and cantrips are pretty super common up here. So in a sense, water shouldn't be a problem, right? There's a cantrip that makes water. It's actually really easy to get access to magically generated water. Now, what they find is people, for whatever reason, people don't like living off magically conjured water. It's great, it'll keep you alive, and you can just make more of it. But people would rather have real water if they could, and the conjured water, while it is good for keeping people alive, it's not good enough to use in various sort of magical processes and stuff like that. If you want to make things that happen to require water, you really want to get yourself access to genuine, non-conjured water. And that gets a little bit harder, because as much as this is kind of like an ocean analogy, like, actual water that is not conjured is pretty hard to come by up here. I mean, you can collect it from storms and stuff like that, but even then, that's a lot easier in the lower altitudes. Up here near the top, near the choking skies, the weather has thinned out quite a bit. So they have ships that go down, like hundreds of miles down in this stratum, to try and scoop water from the large storms and collect it there, because they don't actually get all that much rainfall up here. There are a lot of, yes, Kagras, there are a lot of like low-level people who are trained to conjure water, and that's kind of their job. And yes, Mestre de Desulizos. I don't know what language that is because I keep wanting to pronounce it as French, and it's clearly not. But but yeah, there are rich elites who drink only unconjured water. Similarly, think about it. They don't have continent-sized land masses up here. And the ones that are continent-sized are up higher where you can't breathe properly. So they actually have very limited amounts of arable land. There is not much land where Portuguese, that would do. There's not much land where you can just farm the way we do back on. We take it for granted down here. You can do hydroponics, but that takes water too. It takes less water than normal farming actually, but it still takes water for hydroponics. It's a pain in the rear. There's only so much land to go around, and people also need to build homes and factories and all kinds of other stuff up here. So food is also kind of a luxury. What most people eat, the people who aren't rich, is actually derived from the stuff they call concentrate. Basically, they have specific varieties of crops that they've found that they cultivate, which they're usually closer to mushrooms or other fungi or mosses. They found some crops that grow pretty quickly and that are especially good at gathering the magical energy of the plane, of the sky, basically. So what most people eat is actually they grow these plants that concentrate the energy, and they take the stuff they produce, they like however they extract this stuff from them, basically like pulping them and extracting it. They just call it concentrate. And most of the foods that people eat is fairly bland stuff, that like airline food, that is made from this concentrate. So they take the concentrate and they can use that plus some of these sort of like cantripy sort of magic spells, or maybe more like factory type processes, and they can use the concentrate to crank out very efficient, not very joyful sustenance for people. And that's how they can maintain pretty high populations relative to their tiny little land masses. So yeah, it's really Danilo Villanova is that healthy? It's not unhealthy. It's one of those things. How do you define healthy? You would be healthier if you had a diet made all of plant matter that was grown on the surface, and animal matter that was bred eating normal plant matter grown on the surface. You would be healthier eating proper food. But the concentrate it's not bad for you. It's totally life sustaining. It's just not as good for you. So that's where you start to run into these sort of class differences, right? Because the various nations where you have like the Kubu ruling the thalassocracy here, or the Siaqui ruling the Confederacy, they get to eat a lot more. Very few of them are rich enough that they're eating like all real food all the time, like they're living in the capital and friggin' billionaires or whatever. But they're still they mix up. They have a little bit of concentrate every day, or concentrate based foods, but they also have a little bit of like these delicacies, and they get some like pure water to drink and stuff like that. Which, of course, you still, to some degree, you're trying to like recycle the water and use it for other processes and stuff like that. And you get a lot of these ships where you have a large ship that's being run by like a command crew of these hippo people, and then you have all these other like tabaxi and maybe some Aarakocra and a whole bunch of Griff Lee that are working either below decks or rigging and stuff like that, and they're all subsisting off conjured water and concentrate. So that's kind of what things are like here. So a lot of what goes on is competition for concentrate, or like the land that is good for growing concentrate, and the plants and seeds that you use to grow the concentrate stuff. For metal obviously super valuable. for water, and of course for this sky marrow that they use to make gunpowder, because these are GIF. And if you know one thing about GIF in D&D, they like guns, they like to fight. Just a side note that doesn't really have anything to do with this part of the setting, but again, I based it off that sort of 5 races thing. When I did the what 5 races would I like to use if I can only use 5 races in a setting, the other race that's not included here were Orcs. Because if you were just making a setting with these races plus Orcs, that's actually a pretty cool setting too. And just to quickly do the aside there, is like, you've got the Griff Lee, or your small race, and they can climb, that's cool. Tabaxi can also climb, which means that there's a little bit of overlap there, but of course they're cat people and they're quick. You have Aarakocra who can fly. That's better than climbing, and you've got bird people. And between the birds and the cats, you get a ton of variety in how people can look. And then you would have the GIF, who are a big, strong race, and I also wanted to have the Orcs, who are a big, strong race, but they have very different cultures, right? Because the Orcs, like, the GIF value being civilized, but they also value strength. And then the Orcs are much more, like, free, and they're aggressive in different ways, but they're both strong races that like to fight. I think that would create a really cool dynamic for a setting on their own. We're not doing that here because Orcs in TDDC have a whole different culture going on. You probably won't find any Orcs up here in the sky, whatever we call this part of the setting. But I just thought I'd get that in, because talking about world building, where do things come from? That's part of where all this came from. So then, airships. Yeah, so airships are kind of a big deal, because again, you need special magic to be able to fly up here. The one thing that can stay in the air up here without a bunch of special magic, right? Without needing your like void keyword, you can use void magic or the Zephyric magic up here in this particular stratum. It's a nice place for both of those things. But the other way that things stay up is if they're skylands. So capital ships, like your big warships, like battleships, carrier type ships, are generally built on dead, or occasionally living, floating reefs. You take a reef of an appropriate size, this big rock or coral sort of structure that is self-buoyant, that stays up because of all the centuries of energy that it has accumulated during the life of the organisms that made it up. These things are actually so dense, tough, and buoyant that the bottom of, like, the hull of these huge ships it's not indestructible, but it's basically just not worth attacking. Because it's like attacking a mountain. Like, if there's a fortress on a mountain and you want to siege that fortress, theoretically, you could try and Minecraft your way up. Like, you could try and blast away the mountain until you get into the fortress. But whoever does that on Earth? Virtually no one, because it's really, really hard. So you run into the same sort of thing where the bottom half of capital ships is, for all practical purposes, indestructible in this setting. So you really want to gain altitude with the enemy ships, so you can attack the part where the ship part is, where their propulsion is, where their crew is, where their weapons are. Now, you can actually... they can build stuff on the bottom half, right? They might have gun emplacements down there. You could shoot those off. They're usually not even very well attached, because it takes a lot of work to put... You can build tunnels through these things, and sometimes they do. But generally, like, if there are guns on the bottom, those guns are vulnerable. You should probably take them out. But a lot of it ends up the ships being level and just trying to blast away at each other, almost like normal naval ships. Or else one ship's trying to gain altitude on the other, so that they can shoot down at it. You want to broadside down at the other ship. Have I ever told Little One there's indestructible stuff in the Feysky? No, Joe, I haven't. And it's not actually indestructible. It's just, for all practical purposes, it's not worth... Like, you consider a ship destroyed when its crew's all dead or it lacks the ability to fight back. But then those destroyed ships, those hulls, whoever wins is going to like capture those hulls if they can, bring them back, and build their own ship on top of it. So you could have the same hull that may have been reused for centuries in different wars as different ships, basically. Is it possible to ride the wind? Well, that's the thing. That's for capital ships. So those are heavy ships, basically. There are also lighter ships, right? Because there are ways you can build an airship. Build an airship, not and. Other than just adding propulsion to a small skyland. You can quarry smaller slabs off of a skyland. So you can make like almost a raft type of thing where you just cut off a section to make a much smaller ship using the same form of buoyancy. So that's one way. But you can also build ships out of sorewood, which is a kind of wood that... Sorewood is not... It doesn't fly by itself, but it's really easy. I think I ripped that off of Eberron, actually. It's really easy to enchant sorewood to be flying. So if you took, like, oak, and you wanted to build a boat, just like a literal regular boat out of oak, and then enchant it to fly up here, that's expensive. That takes a lot of work. Again, this is a pretty magical setting. You can make basically anything fly. You can take an actual stone castle from the ground, and if you want to spend enough time, effort, and magic, you can just make that flying castle. But it's really inefficient. You can take a normal boat made of like oak or whatever woods they actually use for boats, and you could enchant that to fly. But again, it's pretty expensive. Whereas sorewood, it actually is very cheap, magically speaking, to make it able to fly. So if you want lighter ships and like cruisers, destroyers, scout type ships, you're more likely to make them out of sorewood, which you've enchanted, or there are some of the animals have parts that actually remain similar to sorewood, where they're easy to enchant to fly after they've died. You use like the skull of a sky. You don't really have a direct skywhale counterpart normally, but big flying animals, you take their skull and you can enchant it to fly and then build that into some kind of a small like ship. There are a variety of designs, and you can also just flat out build. They don't have a lot of airplane type stuff because they have all these other methods. They didn't need to develop aerodynamics the same way we did, and also the wind forces are really strong. But you got to worry about being torn apart there if you don't have like space age materials like we do. But there are still slow moving like balloon type craft, or there's a in between sort of. There are a lot of different ways that you can make something fly. With the names for the skylands different between the races, yeah. That's so many. Yes, John Connor 365. Like so many things in my setting. That's why I have multiple names for the different strata of the Feysky. I really like to keep the real world idea that things have names in different languages. Maybe some of them stick and some of them don't, but a lot of those things are there. What else do I have here before I get it? Oh yeah, light hulls can go a step further, because it's possible to enchant them to have the wind-touched property. And remember, if you don't have wind sight, wind-touched stuff has an advantage against you. So, by making wind-touched light ships, they actually get a lot harder to target. And they can have some other advantages. By taking they can be supernaturally quick, unpredictable maneuvering. In fact, pilots, like if you have a wind-touched ship, and it's an actual ship, like not a living creature, your pilot's going to have wind sight in order to be able to use it properly. Otherwise, you're going to be out of control, or probably just fail in some other way if your pilot doesn't have wind sight. But when a pilot does have wind sight, and they've got a wind-touched vessel, and they really get going, they sometimes call it becoming one with the flow, the way they can ride those invisible currents in the air and do crazy maneuvers and stuff like that. And Yeah, so that makes warfare more interesting. I have other notes for trading. There's lots of trade. Food, spices, concentrate, metals, chemicals, products of exotic creature hunting. They do hunt exotic creatures. Light hulls. Oh, right, whatever. I don't have to get every typo. It's just that if I see one, I fix it. Whaling, yes, there is some whaling type of stuff, not really whales, but some of the Margif ships will fly up especially into the choking winds, to hunt for exotic creatures with rare, because a lot of exotic creatures can create give you rare resources, but also there's a lot of fame or pride in hunting things that are really hard to hunt. Look at this hippo man. You know he likes to hunt. Like, the most dangerous game. Yes. We've got to hunt something. We have about settlements, other stuff. I think I mostly talked about that. So let's get back to our... So that's what life is like up here. Let's get back to our nations. So, the Marmar thalassocracy. If you've never seen the word thalassocracy before, it's not used very often. It just means... It basically means a government... Because it's named like a kind of government, right? Democracy, theocracy, thalassocracy. It's basically a government that rules by virtue of its naval power. So, like, at various times in history, the ancient Greeks or Romans, especially the Greeks, some of the Greek city-states might have been called a thalassocracy because they had a massive navy that controlled a huge area. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. So, the Marmar Gouvernoul here, the government, they're a Kubu supremacist nation. They're not a great place. So they don't have slavery. They don't believe in slavery, but they have a rigid class system, which, as you can imagine, sucks because it's a class system. So they're very clearly delineated. The Kubu are at the top. They're the ruling class, right? They're the nobles. Up there in the top class, just below Kubu, you might have high status spirits and some outsiders. Oh my god, it's a typo there too. So there are some kinds of creatures that they recognize. Like, you can imagine. I'm not saying they'd necessarily have any contact with the Rajas, but you can imagine a Rakshasa that was working with them would be pretty high status creature. You can see how that relationship would work. These guys are very British Empire. They're for better and mostly worse. So the Kubu are at the top. The Siokwi and the Renoster, so the other Gif ethnicities, are kind of down here as the second rank, along with most other friendly spirits and some kind of outsiders they might run into. The Rafa Gif, the other ethnicities, are also kind of around here, maybe even below these two. But it doesn't matter. The thing that matters is the Kubu are on top. Then they have the Tabaxi and most random humanoids. If for some reason an Eladrin ended up here, they would kind of fit into the class system down here, maybe just below the Tabaxi, because the Tabaxi are known and they're valued by the Kubu. They're not all aristocrats, Mestre there, but there are upper middle class Kubus, let's say. I'm sure there have to be some Kubu Gif who are down on their luck, who are in a shitty position. You can imagine there have to be some of the, like, Siokwi or Renoster who are doing really well, who might be doing better than the worst of the Kubus who are down on their luck, who are poor. But it's a class system, right? So even if one of these guys is rich, a poor Kubu might see himself as above them, and there might be other mechanisms in society that benefit them, even though clearly the rich Siokwi family has a higher status in other ways. Hello, Murloc Knight. You're going to have to rewatch most of this later to know what the hell I'm talking about. And anyone else who just joined, thanks for coming. So, yeah. But, the Kubu are in charge here. So, they give the Tabaxi a fairly high position. You know that the Tabaxi, you're never going to see a Hippo or Rhino person working for a Tabaxi in a society. It's just not going to happen. But the Tabaxi still have a kind of a high status. They're seen as very valuable members of the crew. And other random humanoids can be around that situation, as well as low status spirits. Like, spirits still get some kind of credit. Then below them are the Griff Lee, the frog people. The Griff Lee are very useful. They're really good on rigging. They're great climbers. They're good at farmers. They're good at lots of things, actually, if you gave them a chance. But they're seen as very low status because they're so small. And also not humanoid. They're not even humanoid. Because remember, Griff Lee, there's another frog people that's much more common, especially in 5th Ed. I don't remember what they're called. But they're like humanoid frogs. These are not them. Again, the Griff Lee are 100%. They just look like big frogs. And they're usually super cute. But they're like big frogs that have knives. Second, here's the picture. I have it on my computer somewhere, too. Copy image, paste. Yeah. These guys. That's basically what the Griff Lee look like. They're good at climbing. They use tools. They're smart. Yeah, Grung. Thanks, Tiri Rana and Sentient Construct and probably 17 other people who said Grung are the humanoid frog people that are in vogue right now. But I prefer Griff Lee because look at them. They're so cute. It's a frog with a belt. Yep. So they have pretty low status in the society, even despite how useful they are. And then for some reason, other non-humanoids that might be intelligent, who knows, and Aarakocra have very low status in this society. The Kubu have some kind of weird problem with the Aarakocra. I haven't 100% worked out why, but they just really don't like the... Maybe it's just... At some fundamental level, it might just be jealousy because they wish they could fly, and they really can't fly because they're hippos. But I'm sure they have an actual historical, cultural reason. But whatever it is, they treat the Aarakocra as really low status. Which is dumb, because out of all these races, Aarakocra are the only ones who commonly have wind sight. Which, as we've been talking about a whole bunch, wind sight is super useful. And here's where you start to get into... Okay, you have these huge battleships. Okay, it's like an island that they built a fort on top of. It's full of guns and stuff like that. If you want to pilot this, even though these things don't go that fast, you really want your pilot or navigator to have wind sight. It's just very beneficial. And for that... The Kubu captain or their navigator is either going to have like a wind sight monocle, usually, or else they might have a navigator who does the steering, who is some kind of high status spirit. There are some spirits out there that I haven't gotten into a lot of detail of that. I haven't worked out a lot of detail on that, but there are some spirits that they consider very high status and credible, and like this is clearly a worthy person to have on my bridge. Yes, and they especially like them if the spirits have wind sight, because it means they're very useful on their ships. And the thing is, ideally you would like your gunners to have wind sight as well. The Kubu have a very severe shortage of gunners with wind sight, because they don't have that many Aarakocra around, and they don't trust the Aarakocra that much, even though they do sometimes end up as gunners. So most of the time, if one of their big battleships has to try and deal with a wind-touched quality light ships that's just zipping around up there like in turbo mode, and they're just trying to take it down. So they have to operate off massed firepower, is basically. Their plan is... Okay, we don't have this frou-frou wind sight. We don't need to rely on your silly tricks. We have Kubu firepower. And they'll just, like, have big batteries of anti-aircraft guns, basically, and be trying to take this stuff out. Of course, that's a pain in the ass. It's expensive. It uses more gunpowder, which means they have to get even more sky marrow to power all their stuff. So their military is kind of expensive to maintain, and you can see how it's causing... Their being asshats about the whole species thing causes them direct problems, even in the one thing they like to do most. Actually, one of the things I want to mention... You know, I call them the Margif, and this is the Marmar thalassocracy. Even though I mostly just call them Margif so that they don't get confused with Githyanki and Githzerai, which I don't really have in the setting yet, but that doesn't mean they're not in the setting. I just don't care about them, so maybe there are some Githzerai, like, out in space doing whatever Gith things they do. But part of the reason I call them Margif is what I chose to differentiate them, to make them sound different than Githzerai, is that they're, or at least the most common religion, the religion that their society, and actually kind of all three of these nations originally was founded based on, is a version of worshipping Marduk, the god of heroism, right? The problem, and part of the reason especially the Kubu have this crazy class system, is that they have let's face it, a distorted version of the songs of Marduk, of the chants. Their interpretation is kind of shitty. Sorry, I'm sorry, you guys, you are not the heroes, generally speaking. Even though individually you might be good, your society sucks. And the reason that your Kubu society sucks is because they interpret the chants of Marduk, sort of it's like the holy text, except Marduk's people are less into writing and more into singing, and like battle songs and stuff, and oral history for that. They interpret it in a way that's a lot closer to might is right. They don't literally believe might is right, but it's this kind of undercurrents that just sort of infects every part of their society. And it's one of those self-fulfilling things. The Hippo and Rhino people, they are huge, physically powerful people. Now, they think of themselves as civilized. They aren't like crude brawlers and all that stuff. And they've developed all this fancy, advanced, like, ship warfare and stuff. But they still, at some fundamental level, see themselves and internally, religiously justify themselves as being superior because they're so big and strong. And that's part of why they see the Tabaxi as, the Tabaxi are weaker, but they respect Tabaxi because they can still be fairly strong and they're quick. Like, they know that the Tabaxi are good warriors, and to a large extent, their propaganda has been used to try and shape the Tabaxi into good warriors because that's what they want them to be, so they can serve on their ships and help them fight their big wars. But then the Aarakocra and the Griff Lee are flimsy, and the Griff Lee are tiny. Like, how can you respect the guy the size of your boot? He's the size of Hippo guy's boot. So that's why they don't really... That you can see that's ultimately the nature... That's like where this class system really comes from for them. So the other nations, again, they all have this sort of core of Marduk sort of worship, of like, they believe in heroism, they believe in sort of glorious combat and seeking out challenges, and they believe in that in a lot of good ways too. There's a lot of good that actually comes from that religion, and it has a lot of issue. A big thing in the faith of Marduk is Marduk's really anti-slavery. You don't attack, you don't oppress people who are weaker than you. But like the Kubu have that kind of twisted around, so they end up with, they don't have slaves, they don't like, as far as they're concerned, they're not oppressing these people, they just arrange their society so that the people do what they're good at, and the big strong people do the ruling, and the quick, lithe, but still kind of powerful people do a lot of the sailing and the fighting and stuff as well. And then you'd have these like little people that are just not well suited to these higher pursuits, and that's how they get all this stupid racist kind of crap embedded in their society. But that's how it is. They don't like violence against lower classes. They wouldn't want to fight, like get in a fight. It's ridiculous, the idea of a Kubu being physically violent towards a Griff Lee or an Aarakocra outside of the context of like war or other appropriate combat. Like, you wouldn't see a Kubu like slap a Griff Lee across the street. The frog would go flying. There's a lot of square cube rule going on between those two guys. You wouldn't see that because it'd be so beneath them, and it'd actually be repulsive to them to beat on someone weak like that. Like, that just doesn't make sense. But they can have all kinds of crazy wars with the other nations that happen to be other, like, that happen to be other big, strong hippo rhino people. So yeah, but you do run into where, like, jobs and roles and ranks and stuff are limited by their class. If you want to envision how this society works, where is this? There's this cool picture that I saw on the internet. It's funny that Launchpad, when we were doing some other role-playing thing, pulled up this same picture that for some other purpose. But see this Otter? Look at this Otter guy in military uniform. This guy looks awesome, okay? How can you not love this guy? Well, I can imagine an interaction in Kubu society where you have this Kubu captain who's like actually a great guy. He's good at his job, he's smart, and he has a subordinate who is this, like, Otter person who is down there with the Tabaxi, if not, and actually probably lower than the Tabaxi because it's tiny, right? But this Kubu captain has promoted this guy because he's so excellent at his job, and this captain would explain to someone else how great this guy is. He's friends, he's so skilled, and he's given him the ultimate compliment. He recommended him for command. Now, the ultimate honor is that this guy is that he would be recommended for command. It's a formality. He would never be granted a command because he's not Margif. He's not a Hippo Rhino person. But in the eyes of this Kubu captain, who is otherwise a totally great guy, that's like the greatest honor he could bestow on his comrade, is to recommend him for a position that he would never actually get. So that's an eye into their society. Yeah, Otter Orestria is correct. Otter is a very good boy. So, oh yeah, I had some images over here of, like, stuff like the sky reefs and stuff. This would be more like if you ran into the sky reefs that are alive. Usually the ones that you're building on look a lot less alive than that, or there might be a side of the Skyland that looks like this, and the other side is dead, and it's just kind of growing over in that direction. And some other stuff. These are like the more fossilized ones, where it's like a dead one. And yeah, some cool stuff there. Just random images, but yeah. But yeah, Arthur Herman, he should be Admiral Otterson, but in this nation he never would be because he couldn't be promoted to captain. You couldn't be the captain of a ship. He's not here, one of these guys. No, Pixel Gemini, I'm saying Hippo and Rhino because the GIF in D&D are these Rhino guys. I have two different ethnicities of the Hippo guys and also a Rhino ethnicity that they kind of group together. They don't interbreed, but they're all considered kind of on par. Anyway, so yeah. So anyway, as the Kubu, they don't have a lot of wind sight, so the light ships don't work as well for them. So they really go with heavy battleships. They tend to have a lot of them. They hate the Aarakocra, as I mentioned, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they like overwhelming firepower. Has mixed results. Good at assaulting islands. They still have a pretty big territory. Their capital is named Rambasa. I don't know if that came from anywhere or if I made it up out of my ass. I just think it sounds really cool. So that's why their capital is named Rambasa. And by the way, their military leader, they do have the civilian government is in charge, but the leader of their military is the most prestigious role in their whole nation, of course. And it is, of course, the Wind Marshal. Because Wind Marshal sounds pretty badass. Like, you would want to respect the guy called the Wind Marshal. Like, that sounds like a serious dude. I've been saying guy, him, his, dude all this time. I don't see any need for them to have, like, gender issues in their society. They can be perfectly egalitarian for genders. They have enough, like, different ways to be asshats without that. So that's fine. Then, so in contrast to them, we have the Siakwi Confederacy. Siakwi is, by the way, like, where do some of these names? I was googling different words for, like, rhinos and hippos in different languages. I think Siakwi is, like, I don't know, an Afrikaans or something like that for rhino, something like that. So they have a different style of uniforms. I think that they have the single-breasted ones, whereas this guy with his double-breasted uniform, he's probably actually a Kubu. The Siakwi, they have blue sashes and green sashes for different positions instead of the red I think it's red sashes that the Kubu like. So the Siakwi Confederacy, they were once colonial and oppressive like the Marmar, but they've actually come a long ways in terms of fostering theoretical equality. Like I said in a brief intro, they still have a lot of structural inequality. So they have gotten rid of most, if not all, of their rules that say a tabaxi can't be a captain and like Griff Lee are lower and stuff like that. So they really they don't have the class system, so they're much better already, and they've basically eliminated all the places in the law where they're different, but their society is still mainly run by Siakwi, Gif, few like Renoster and Rafa, like the Rhinos and the other ethnicities. Kubu are pretty rare here because they all live in their own nation where they're in charge. You don't get a lot of Kubu coming over here where they're not in charge of everything, even though as Hippo or Rhino people, they tend to be doing pretty well. They tend to usually have more resources. So that's where you find that still most of the people who are in charge are going to be the same sorts of people who are actually the high status in that other nation. One big contrast is the Siakwi have tons of Aarakocra, because those Aarakocra who have an option come live here and don't live in a shitty Kubu nation where they're all like oppressed, even though the Kubu would say they're not oppressed. So yeah, they have lots of Aarakocra, which means that they have no trouble coming up with wind sight gunners, which helps to drastically improve the efficiency of basically all their ships. They also have a little bit. They have a little bit of a stronger religious tradition, even though the Gouvernoul up there is based largely on these sort of Marduk-related traditions. The Siakwi are much more actually religious, and they have a much better interpretation of the religion of Marduk. So they actually they are much closer to the heroic aspirations and not having that sort of might makes right, I'm better because I'm stronger mentality that is really not what Marduk is supposed to be all about. Marduk / Cord / Grumsh, all the other names that different groups have for that deity. But so one of the things that differentiates them is they have priests on their ships, on all their ships. They actually bless their ships, which is kind of neat. So between that, so they actually, I don't know how much difference the blessing makes. I think it's more of a cultural thing, but the fact that they have a lot more Aarakocra, so they have a lot more wind sight gunners, just does give them a big advantage there. On the other hand, for whatever reason, maybe there are advantages to being the asshole colonizing powers, because the thalassocracy seems to be stronger overall. They hold a lot more territory than the Confederacy. So, oh yeah, I have another thing here. These guys tend to be sun worshippers, actually, especially the Siakwi ethnicity, where they like to pray twice a day, like dawn and dusk, which is kind of cool. But yeah, so they don't have nearly as much actual land territory as the thalassocracy, and they have to focus. They don't, because the thalassocracy has these big battle fleets with tons of heavy ships, and the Siakwi have had a hard time keeping as many heavy hulls like armored up and armed and maintaining them. So they end up with a mix of heavy and light ships, and it's reached the point where, because the enemy has really heavy-duty firepower and bigger fleet, if they had a capital in a fixed position, the Marmar would actually just come in and blow it up, basically. But not literally blow it up. They don't have island-destroying weapons. But if there was a fixed capital of the Siakwi, it would probably just get crushed. And yes, as said Benal, the sun worshippers, as in they worship Raus now. which is basically like the same thing as worshipping the sun. The difference is theological. But yeah, so because if they had a fixed capital, it would just get taken down, and they have to work really hard to keep things up and to keep spread out and stuff like that. Their capital is called the capital ship, which is, I realize, is confusing because capital ship means something different in warfare, but it's an old, mostly disarmed dreadnought. It's an extremely large one that they move around. I think I've got notes on that. So yeah, it's like a huge floating city that they use as a capital. It's defended by lighter ships, but they change its location frequently. They move it around. There's no fixed path or schedule, so they post ships at various locations. They call them lighthouses, just ships that know the current location of the capital ship. And then when the capital ship moves, they leave behind another one of these ships, a lighthouse, to help find it. But they're always keeping it on the move so that the enemy's main fleet can't find and just like blow them up. So you can tell they're kind of on the back foot. And yeah, their navy, they have some like heavy warships, but they do rely more on having Zephyric vessels with Aarakocra pilots and Aarakocra gunners so that they can outmaneuver. And when they get into battles with those huge Marmar battleships, hopefully those battleships are mostly just missing, and you can just fly around them and pick at them and just cause them a bunch of damage and then get away. So that's how they have to do it. Yeah, okay. They that's why I was thinking they used to have more battleships and cruisers, but they lost most of them over the course of their war. And that's why they've been so reliant on Zephyric ships to just stay in the war at all. Having the more light and Zephyric ships actually does give them an advantage when they're operating in the hollow sky, where like up in the upper stratum above them, which lets them do things like travel up there and then drop down to raid Margif living places and stuff like that, and then ascend to escape pursuit. So that's kind of the dynamics they have going on in the war there. No, Pixel Gemini, they don't have a lot of Final Fantasy looking airships. They're mostly big floating reef type things where they built up a fortress on top of this big floating rock, and they're just using various magical propulsion and or modified sails, like really huge sails that take advantage of the extremely magical energy of the plane and the great currents and stuff like that to float them along. So yeah, the other one's the Free Skies League. I think I have less information on them. I think the Free Skies League is actually doing better than the Confederacy because they are more of a league. They're not a single nation that is at war with the government. They're more about a lot of things. Yeah, you're right, Marco G. Someone did ask about steering earlier. That's where we're still in world building here. I haven't done too much work on how they power and maneuver the ships. There's just kind of magic and or magic sails. Seems to be my thoughts so far, but I'm not 100% fixed on that. One of the things, actually, well, here, I'll just get through the Free Skies League, and then I'll start talking about more of the stuff that I'm still working on. So yeah, the Free Skies League, they're the loosest society by far. They have more of the different like ethnicities. This is the only one where it's not uncommon to see like hippos or rhino people who work for someone who is one of the other species. So they're definitely a better society in that way, more egalitarian in practice, as opposed to the Confederacy, which is egalitarian in theory. So yeah, and they have an assortment of smaller populations. They have a mishmash of equipment. They have some old battleships, but again, they don't have like a real main battle fleet in the same sense because they're not at war directly with the other powers. It's more that they would all. It's more that if you attack one of them, they will all band together to defend it. In theory, there may be some politics involved, but the theory is that if you attack one of them, one of their islands, that you are kind of declaring war on all of them, which helps to prevent them from being picked on and just completely taken over. But there is politics involved, and sometimes they do still get taken over by the other nations and not necessarily defended to the degree they would have liked. They are very much like Greek city-states. Yes, Kagurus. And what else? Yeah. Oh, yeah, the other thing they have going for them is they have some of the best, like, heavily defended fortress islands. So they may not have as many ships, but they have some of their islands are just a huge wall of fortress. And again, there isn't actually that much difference between a super heavy dreadnought in this setting and a really well fortified island, except that the island doesn't move much. But yeah, they have a lot of defensive strength from those fortresses, and that also helps them to hold out. The Confederacy clearly should have gone with that tactic, but they ended up in things just didn't work out that way for them. So anyway, yeah. So stuff that I'm working on with these guys with this part of the setting. Remember the ancient Atarans. They had Magitech. Their Magitech was super advanced. They use Magitech the way we use electricity, right? Like, they're doing everything, and they're refining it and finding more complex ways for it to interact. But I see this little subsetting as they're much more magic punk in the steampunky sort of sense, like in the early age of Steam, where they're finding all these things. They're just like when mankind was learning about electricity for the first time. The Steam age wasn't actually the first time we learned of electricity, but it's when we started to learn about it enough to do anything. Yeah, Etarans could build pretty much anything they wanted to. They were ridiculous. They had the trams, and they had ridiculous stuff. So these guys aren't like building magical computers by any stretch of the imagination. It's much more like they've just learned how to use. It's like when we just learned how to use electricity, and we just learned how to build the first steam engine, and there's this sort of like crazy race where you're just trying to find ways that you can like pile these ideas together and make things work. They're clunky and inefficient, but they're doing it and stuff like that. So I like the idea that on a big battleship or something like that, they'd be really proud to have their own printing press, because they do have a certain amount of like Magitech stuff going on, so they could have a printing press with movable type, and that would be a cool thing, and they could like spread orders throughout the ship. They could make pamphlets and stuff like that, and they think they're awesome. And then the outer edges of their technology, like the bleeding edge of technology that they're just working on that may shake up the setting, is they're trying to find ways to mass produce low-level magical scrolls by some combination of concentrate and maybe spark dust and like the printing press and stuff like that. There are people that are trying to experiment with building ship guns, because right now their guns are actually just guns. They have their magical-ish gunpowder stuff. They're firing projectiles at each other. But there are some of them that are trying to develop, like just the outer edge of technology. There's virtually none of this is out there, but it's something you do quests about if you are going to make adventures in the setting, is that the different governments are trying to come up with ways to make guns that would use cheaply produced magical scrolls to create magical ammunitions. It's like they're trying to build like the battleship version of like the caster guns from Outlaw Star, basically. They really want to be able to make like magic missile shot, like the Kubu, the Marmar Thalassocracy, the guys that have very few wind sight gunners, but they have all these big heavy ships. Some of them are dreaming of advancing the technology to the point that instead of firing a big spray of bullets out there to try and take out enemy ships, that they could be firing like a big boy, like powered up version of magic missiles. You like fire a shell of some description that gets a certain distance, and then a fuse triggers a scroll that then sprays out magic missiles to try and hit these stupid pissant little like bird powered flitting around like light ships that are causing him so much trouble. I don't know if the sashes are an important political tool. I just see that more as a cultural thing. I like when you're making a culture, I like the idea that they have certain, you come up with an item of clothing is actually one of the good ways to help your culture feel different. And I realize in a sense it's really shallow. But on the other hand, if you just want to make, the other side of shallow is easy to grasp. And it's really easy to grasp. Like, it's hard to say, oh, no. When a Siokwi looks at another Hippo man, he can instantly tell just by the facial features, no, that's definitely a Kubu. You can tell. Or if that's not a Kubu, like, their ancestors were Kubu. That's fine, that's probably true. Just like different people on Earth can tell, like, what part of the world one of their ancestors might be from just by looking at their facial features. But for people who are coming into this fiction, who are coming into this setting, who don't know about it as much, it makes it much easier to know, oh hey, these guys have double-breasted coats and red sashes. And these other guys, he's got a green sash. Oh, he's got to be the other kind. And yeah, I know. He's only got one set of buttons. They got different uniforms and stuff. And the red sash guys, their captains almost always have like a monocle, and apparently it's a magic thing that helps them to pilot the ship to compensate for their other problems. Whereas these guys over here, they don't have all those magic monocles because they have, bird people who can do this stuff. And yeah, it's much like flags. Exactly, Danilo. Flags are a very shallow way to tell countries apart, but it does the job. So but flags are usually for nations. I like the idea of ethnicities being able to be told apart by the sashes. And yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. I pick different things. Actually, world building. One of the things. It's barely come up in the story that I'm supposed to be writing, but I've been slow on it because I've been working on so many other things right now. But in Mage Captain Sahara, my military fantasy novel I'm supposed to be working on and putting out new chapters for Lore Master patrons every once in a while, sometimes. It is up to chapter 7 or something. But their setting has people have, there's a particular garment that people wear in their setting that it's kind of like, it's like a little half cape thing that you wear it down the right side of your body. It goes down the front and back. It's just it's kind of a narrow thing. It's completely useless. Sort of like a sash is completely useless. But basically everyone wears it in their society because in that setting, they don't do a lot of manual labor because they have undead to do everything. The Society of Mage Captain Sahara, which I'm going to do a video on at some point, or maybe I'll turn that into one of these streams. But yeah, short version is they consider the bodies of their ancestors to be a resource. So when your grandfather dies, you pray for them, and you have a funeral because their soul goes on to heaven and stuff. But they're one of the assets that your grandfather left you is his body, and they do a religious ritual. They reawaken that. And now his body can perform labor, which helps to keep your family, able to sustain themselves. And over time, they build up where each family has multiple of these undead servants. So they're a very wealthy society. And part of the thing is their society developed this odd item of clothing, this sort of cape cloak thing you wear down just one side of your body. But having a clean, crisp, white, esclavina, the cape thing, shows, they don't think of it this way anymore because it's so far in the past, but it shows that you don't have to dirty your hands doing manual labor. It shows that you're a wealthy, upstanding member of society who has a bunch of undead out there doing labor for you, or you hire them out. So that's the kind of thing you think about when you make an item of clothing for society, and I like that. Even with the lion people I mentioned earlier, I like the idea that what do you think of a lion? They have this huge, beautiful mane, or at least the males do. I like the idea that the males, when you see them on ships, you have the lion people, they all have like a bandana that they have there's got their mane all tied down and packed in, because they don't like to show it off to just anyone. It's private for them. So I like, coming up with, even if you have one item of clothing and then you have a little bit of justification for it, and the sashes are very similar to my Esclavina concept. I mean, the sash is sash like a tie in Western society is an item of useless clothing that shows that you are wealthy or respectable or professional, and that's why the Rhino people have sashes and stuff like that. So yeah, that's we've been going on almost 2 hours. I know this wasn't a very good stream for answering your questions or talking about I'll have to do another one at some point, or I'd like at some point in the future to do stuff where I more get like ideas from you guys and help you. Or, I mean, it's really, I don't like how humble brag or whatever, just like presumptuous. I don't like how presumptuous it says, oh, tell me your world problem issues and I'll solve them because I'm so smart. But I feel like I'm okay at this stuff, and I feel like people want to hear what I have to say. So I would like to do some of those streams at some point. But yeah, we got to start wrapping this one up now. I'm sure Arestria would like to get on with her day and have a day in the future at some point. She can. We're hoping. Part of the reason I chose this time, like the 2 hours earlier slot, was pretty popular on earlier things. Pretty popular on the poll for when people want release times. But if we started at 7 in my time, then it's a time of day that Orestria can realistically be around. And if we're doing a stream that's got a lot more of a Q&A component, we can actually have Orestria on voice reading out questions and stuff like that. And that'll be fun too. I also want to do more like art streams because that's easy. But I'm still not trying to schedule a stream every week. This is largely because I feel bad about being so far behind on the episode. So I hope this was some interesting ideas. This is one of those things where anyone can just take this and run. If you wanted, someone said they liked the idea of running a campaign in a setting like this, go nuts. Take whatever you like from these ideas. If there was anything you don't like in these ideas, don't take it. Make your own. It's awesome. That's the great thing about ideas. But I want to develop this thing a little further, and some of the questions you guys asked. Again, you guys asking questions, if I don't have an answer written down somewhere, there's some secret information that I didn't share with you here, which I'm sure isn't very important anyway. But if I don't have a question written down somewhere, like the answer to it, and you guys ask it, that makes me think. Even if I don't answer you, that makes me think about it, and that's what helps grow this thing. That's why there's so much shit in the TDDC setting anyway, because people asking me questions helps me to expand it. So that's really fun for me. So I do want to thank everyone for coming out. I want to especially thank all my Patreon patrons, including the members of the organization, because the only reason that I'm able to do this is my job, and I'm able to pay for upgrading my internet, even though the new company is evil. But I'm able to get internet that's capable of streaming. It's all because of my Patreon patrons. You guys are the ones who make everything work. So if anyone wants to support me and isn't currently, demonac.com/Patreon. If you go to, that's patreon.com/demonac. I suck at this. You can find all my stuff at demonac.com. It has links to everything, and I'm going to try and make it more useful. The latest page I'm going to put up when I have streams, when I actually schedule a stream. I'm going to try and put those on the latest page as well. Also, I changed demonac.com/latest, so if you click on one of the things that is released, it actually opens there now. So that's cool. Thanks for the link, Orestia. And yeah, we're gonna do stuff. I'm hoping to get the next episode out in a week, but we're gonna see. But I'm gonna try real hard because I'm most of the way done the main hurdle that I had left, and then I think I will have animated all the big hard things. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, but once again, thanks everyone for coming out, and hopefully the music was at a decent volume level and not annoying. So yeah, everyone, enjoy your weekend. Have a great time, and, wash your hands, because that's what things are like nowadays. All right. See you next time.